So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this class, or this retreat, I guess it's called, on the mind, the importance of knowing the mind and what is the mind, and so on. So, first, take a few minutes to settle down, both physically and mentally. You can check your body and try to be in a good position, because the way we hold our body does have an effect on our mind. So it's good to try to sit with a straight back. That helps the mind to be more clear and focused, able to listen attentively and take in what's being said. But it's also very important to be relaxed. So one way we can be more relaxed is to observe the breath flowing in and out. Just let the breath flow naturally. Don't try to interfere with it or control it in any way. Just allow your body to breathe. And then with your mind, your awareness, be aware of each breath as it flows in and out. And if your mind wanders away to something else, like some other thought or memory or sound, once you notice your mind has wandered away from the breath, just gently let go of that other object and come back to the breath. Just do that for a few minutes to relax physically and also mentally, so your mind isn't going all over the place thinking of many different things. Now let's spend a few more minutes generating positive motivation for participating in this session and this weekend retreat. So what we're going to be looking at is the subject of mind. What is the mind? How it works, and so on. This is a really important topic in Buddhism because the mind is the source of all of our experiences, both happiness and misery or confusion. So it's really important to know what the mind is and how it works, and learn how to work on the mind, to work with the mind, so that we can have more of the happiness we wish for. And happiness doesn't just mean, sensual pleasures and excited experiences. It means deep, genuine, pure experiences of peace and joy, of which there are different types, different levels of happiness, all the way up to the highest happiness, the state of enlightenment. So all of that can be achieved by knowing and working with the mind. The mind is also the source of suffering and problems and confusion, both our own individual problems as well as the problems in the world. So again, it's important to understand the mind and how the mind creates problems and difficulties, so that we can stop doing that as much as we can and do what we can to help others stop creating suffering for themselves. So this knowing about the mind and how to work with the mind is really good for ourselves, enables us to have more peace and happiness, less misery and confusion. But ideally, we think beyond just our own self, I'm just one person, others are many. And we all do at least sometimes feel the wish to help others and to help the world, reduce the suffering, increase the happiness and peace. So by learning about our own mind and how to work with our mind, we can be more helpful to others. It doesn't necessarily mean teaching them, telling them how they can work with their minds, but just being a kinder, happier, more peaceful, more wise person with more positive qualities. So just by being that way, we can influence others, bring them more happiness. And then, of course, if they are interested in learning about their minds and how to work with their minds, we can share what we have learned. So there's numerous ways in which we can benefit others by working on our own mind. So try to open your mind, your heart to others, other beings, to the world, and feel that your reason for being here, learning about your own mind, is so that you can be more beneficial to others and less likely to do things that might hurt or cause problems to others. And if you're comfortable with the idea of enlightenment, becoming enlightened to benefit all other beings in the best possible way, then you can incorporate that as well. I think that's your long-term goal, becoming enlightened, a Buddha, to be able to help all living beings. Okay, so I'm really happy to be able to talk about this topic. It's a really interesting one and a really important one. But I don't want you to think that I know everything there is about the mind. In fact, just before this session, I was thinking about some things that I still don't understand. There's a lot of things I still don't understand. But I do understand that it is important to know about the mind and to work with the mind. I know that much. And I've had the opportunity to learn from Tibetan teachers over the years. So I'm happy to share what I have learned. I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you may have as we go along. So as Venerable Chuni mentioned, I made some slides. There's quite a bit of technical terminology and concepts that are part of this topic of the mind. And instead of me just saying those words and maybe you don't even know how to spell them, it's helpful to have something you can look at and also use later if you want to come back to and refresh your memory. And also there's a number of books that I can recommend. I haven't yet made a list, but I will at some point make a list of recommended books. But the books tend to be, again, technical and difficult to understand if you just try to read them on your own. It is a difficult subject, but I'll try my best to make it as easy as possible, as practical as possible. So we're having this weekend now, and then there'll be another weekend in August on the same topic. So we have 2 full weekends to look at this topic of the mind. So the first slide gives a list of the topics that I plan to cover this weekend. I may not be able to, but I'll try. So why it's important to know the mind, what is the mind, and then we'll start looking at different types of mind. For example, the 6 consciousnesses. And then perception and conception, those are 2 general divisions of the mind. And it's important to know what they are and what the differences are between them, because these are all experiences that we have. These are all happening in us constantly. And it's just really helpful to be able to know what's what and how they work and so on. And then we'll also look at minds that are correct and wrong. So some of our experiences are correct. We see things correctly. We experience things correctly. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we have wrong states of mind. So that's useful to know. In particular, in Buddhism, we say that our afflictions, sometimes they're called delusions or afflictive emotions, afflictive states of mind. These are things like anger, jealousy, arrogance, attachment, and so on. These are the troublemakers, the ones who cause all the suffering, all the problems in our lives, and also in our relationships, and also from life to life, keeping us in cyclic existence, this very unsatisfactory situation. So those afflictions are all wrong states of mind. So it's useful to know what is a wrong state of mind, why is it wrong, how is it wrong, what can I do about it? Because fortunately we can clear these up. They're not permanent fixed parts of our mind, but we can gradually reduce them and eventually overcome them altogether. So that's why it's helpful to know about wrong states of mind. And then we'll at least start looking at 7 types of awareness, which is an explanation of how our mind goes from being wrong, having wrong states of mind, mistaken states of mind, to more correct ones, and eventually to the most correct state of mind. So the 7 types of awareness is sort of a step-by-step process of from the worst state of mind that can be to the best state of mind that can be. Yeah, it sort of gives us a map to follow. So we'll start by just looking at the importance of mind. And there's a quotation here from the Dalai Lama. This is an article from a teaching that he gave. I can't remember exactly, but there's the link there if you want to look it up. It's on Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. I think it was part of a symposium or conference with scientists, and he was talking about the mind. So this was a nice quotation. There are 2 reasons why it is important to understand the nature of the mind. One is because there is an intimate connection between mind and karma. The other is that our state of mind plays a crucial role in our experiences of happiness and suffering. So I'll in the coming slides, I'll explain those 2 reasons more. But when I first read this, I thought, saying that it's important to know about the mind because there's an intimate connection between mind and karma. I just wonder if that immediately triggers off interest in Western people, because karma is not normally something that Western people are concerned about. It is in Asia. Many people who are traditionally brought up Buddhist or maybe also Hindu, for them karma is a big part of their life and something that they're concerned about. Want to make sure that we create good karma and avoid bad karma. I mean, we do have the word karma in our language. It's in the dictionary now, and people do talk about karma, but I don't know if it really is such an important topic for people. So to say, oh, there's an intimate connection between mind and karma, people might wonder, well, so what? But let's go on and look at that, and maybe we will feel more inclined to see the importance of that. So the next slide, this is a quotation from the Dhammapada, which is a collection of sayings by the Buddha. It's probably one of the most well-known texts or books of the Buddha's saying. It's been translated many times. I don't know how many different translations we have in our library here, but it's many translations of the Dhammapada. I think these 2 verses come right at the beginning. They're the first 2 verses of that book. So probably many people have read these, and they're often quoted. So it seems that in these two verses, the Buddha is talking about karma, even though the word karma doesn't actually appear, but it's an explanation of karma, how karma works. So it says, mind is the forerunner of all evil conditions, or bad conditions, or painful conditions. If you don't like the word evil, you could replace it with something else, but bad stuff. Mind is chief, and they are mind-made. If with an impure mind one speaks or acts, then pain follows one, even as the wheel follows the hoof of the ox. So basically he's saying here that if we have an impure mind, and an impure mind could be, for example, anger or hatred or greed or jealousy. There's a whole range of different unwholesome, unskillful, negative, whatever you want to call it, states of mind, disturbing states of mind. So if one of those arises in our mind and we don't know how to manage it, we come under its influence, and then it comes out in our speech or our action. So that's actually how we create karma. Karma means action, and action can be done with speech, talking, or with our action, bodily, physical actions, but also just with our mind, just with our thoughts, we can create karma. So there's 3 ways we create karma. So if we create karma, we do an action under the influence of an impure state of mind, a negative state of mind, the result will be pain, some kind of pain, physical or mental or both. And he's using this analogy of probably at the Buddha's time, there were lots of ox carts roaming around. So if you have an ox hooked up to a cart, the wheel of the cart will follow the ox. Wherever the ox goes, the wheel follows. So in a similar way, suffering will follow us. Some suffering will happen to us no matter where we go, if we act out impure states of mind. So that's basically about bad karma, how bad karma is created. The second verse is, mind is the forerunner of all good conditions. Mind is chief, and they are mind-made. If with a pure mind one speaks or acts, then happiness follows one, even as the shadow that never leaves. So the analogy of a shadow is probably more familiar to us. Everybody in the world experiences shadows. When the sun is shining, we're outside. We have our shadow following us wherever we go. So in a similar way, if we have a pure state of mind, and pure can mean kindness and compassion and generosity and honesty, wanting to live ethically, do the right thing and avoid the bad thing. So there's various positive states of mind. So if our mind is in a positive state, and on that basis we speak or act, the words or actions that we do will be the cause of good karma. That's good karma, and that will be the cause of happiness. So happiness will be our result, the result that we experience. So basically this is saying that, yeah, we are the mind, not we, but the mind is the creator. There's other statements in the Buddha's teachings where it actually says that the mind is the creator. Mind is the creator of all experiences, both positive and negative, virtuous and unvirtuous. So the mind then is very, very important. But saying that the mind is the creator, we shouldn't get the idea that the mind creates the world. The mind says, I want to make this world, and I want to make beings, human beings and other kinds of beings, and create floods and hurricanes and all that kind of thing. So don't think mind is like God creating the world. It's not quite like that. But what it means is karma. Actually, Buddhism says it's karma that is the source of things. Karma is created by mind. Whenever we do an action, there's always a mind, a state of mind that's motivating that action. And depending on what kind of mind it is, if it's a positive one or a negative one, a virtuous one or a non-virtuous one, that will affect or determine the kind of experiences that come as a result of those actions. So it's important to know about the mind because we want to make sure we have positive experiences, happiness, and not negative ones, unhappiness. So that requires understanding the mind. And then the next slide unpacks what the Buddhist, or what the Dalai Lama said about mind and happiness. That the mind, it's important to know about the mind because that's the source of our happiness and suffering. So this is looking at a somewhat different way of how things work. If we take the example of two people in the same situation, going through the same kind of experience, I use the example of a delayed flight. We've probably all had that experience. Your flight gets delayed by even half an hour, but sometimes it's hours, sometimes many hours, sometimes a whole day. So this can be a challenging experience, and different people can react in this kind of situation. I'm just giving like the extreme possibilities. So one person could get very upset and very angry and spends the whole time feeling miserable, complaining, blaming, making a lot of noise and so on. And so if somebody reacts in that way, clearly their mind is not happy and not peaceful. It's very disturbed, very unpeaceful, very unhappy. And that can go on the whole time, the hours that the person has to wait. But another person in the same situation, having to wait the same amount of time, is accepting of the situation, and they're able to remain calm, they don't get upset, and they may even use the time constructively. I mean, they could spend the time watching movies on their device or whatever, so they don't mind. But it's also possible they use the time constructively. I once heard the Dalai Lama saying, he sometimes has this experience of his flight being delayed. And what he does is he sits there in the waiting room and thinks about texts that he has recited. He mentioned in particular the 8 verses of thought training. But, he's recited many, many texts. The Tibetan monks and nuns memorized many, many Buddhist texts. But he mentioned that one. So he goes over that text and meditates on the verses of that text. So that's a very constructive use of time, familiarizing oneself with positive teachings that will help you, stay in a positive state of mind rather than a negative one. So we can see from this example then that the two people, they're both human beings with a body, with a mind, and in the same situation, having to wait a certain amount of time for their flight. But the way they experience this is quite different. For one person, it's a source of great misery, great unhappiness, and they're probably creating bad, negative karma as well with their anger and so on. The other person is able to remain calm and even possibly use the time constructively, create virtue rather than non-virtue. So that's an example that illustrates how unhappiness and suffering are not so much because of what's going on out there. That's how it looks. That's how it seems, Oh, this situation is just driving me crazy, or this person is driving me crazy, making my life miserable. So it's not so much a question of what's happening outside of ourselves, but more what's happening inside of ourselves. So unhappiness and suffering are due to afflictive states of mind that we don't know how to manage. But the good news is we can learn how to manage these so they don't hijack our mind and destroy our peace of and peace and happiness. And this is a big part of Dharma, Buddha's teachings. It's how to learn to work with our mind so that we can keep our mind peaceful, positive. And when we learn the Dharma, we learn all kinds of methods that we can use. Yeah, so I forgot what I was saying now. So we learn lots of methods that we can use to work on our mind, to manage our mind. And when I was preparing for this, I remembered this one situation that happened kind of in the early years of my experience of learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma. I was in Nepal, so I got ordained, and I was staying at Kopan Monastery, and there were a group of 15 or 20 ordained people, Western ordained people, living together at Kopan. We were quite fortunate because the law at that time was that foreigners were only allowed to stay in the country for maybe 6 months, I think. You could get a visa for 6 months and then they'd throw you out and you had to get out of the country. You could come back after a while, but you couldn't stay continuously. But the person who was responsible for giving visas was the chief of police in Kathmandu. And he happened to be a Buddhist at that point in time. And he was very, supportive of us. And so he would keep giving us visas, the Western ordained people staying at Kopan. So I think I was able to stay for 3 years, at least, continuously without having to leave the country, which was very nice. You don't want to have to be moving around all the time in your ordained life. But at some point, we got this message saying that he wanted to see all of us, all the ordained people, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He demanded that we come to his office on a certain day. And we were supposed to be there at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we all trooped down to Kathmandu and went to the police station, and we were told to wait. So there was a great big room with chairs, and so we sat down to wait. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, finally 2 o'clock. We were ushered into his office. So 4 hours we were sitting there. And there are no vending machines, like in American waiting rooms. So nothing to eat, nothing to drink. Lunchtime came and I was pretty hungry. I'm sure we all were. So that was a very challenging situation. My mind was just freaking out. Not every minute or every second, but quite frequently, thoughts coming up. Why does he do this to us? Why didn't he tell us to just come at 2 o'clock? Why didn't he let us go out and get lunch and come back? All these kind of complaints in my mind. I managed to keep my mouth shut, but internally there was a lot of explosion going on. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche was there with us. He was also having to wait for 4 hours. And I did not see the slightest trace of agitation, irritation, impatience. He really lived up to his name, because Zopa is the Tibetan word for patience or fortitude, whatever you want to call it. And it was just wonderful to watch him. But I also wondered, how do you do it? I want to be like that too. But I was, I guess, still new in the Dharma and not knowing how to deal with my mind. And my mind was still very untrained. So that really taught me the lesson of, how important it is to learn how to manage your mind. If you can't manage your mind, we can't control what happens to us in our life. We often find ourselves in difficult, challenging situations. And that was relatively comfortable. We had a comfortable place to sit. We weren't like out in the hot sun, people screaming at us. So it was fairly comfortable, but still, the experience of having to wait and not knowing even how long you're going to have to wait was quite unpleasant. So that really taught me the importance of learning how to manage the mind and have methods to keep the mind in a positive state. Because otherwise it's just so painful. It's just so unpleasant if you don't know how to manage your mind, don't know how to manage your anger and your impatience and so on. So what is the mind? Okay, that's the next slide. So this is a big topic in Buddhism, at least in the Tibetan tradition. There's a whole area, a subject matter called Lorig, which the monks and nuns in the Gelugpa monasteries study usually early on in their education system. And I had the good fortune to study it fairly early, and we went into it in quite detail. We had classes 5 days a week for 3 months. I feel like I had, pretty good chance to learn about this topic. But I still, there's still many things that I don't understand, and there's things that aren't even explained in the text, and sometimes hard to find answers to them. But anyway, it's an ongoing thing, and it's not enough just to study the texts, the traditional material. You also have to look at your own mind and apply that information to yourself and your experience. So I'll be sharing some of that material in the Lorig texts with you. So there's a definition of the mind, which is 2 words, quite simple: clarity and awareness. So that's how the mind is defined in the Lorig texts, which are based on the Indian treatises. The Dalai Lama always talks about the Nalanda tradition, so these great Indian masters, using the sutras, the Buddha's own words, and then formulating them into texts and ways of explaining things. So that's the source of this definition: clarity and awareness. So what does that mean? So the word clarity, there are different ways of explaining it, but the easiest is it refers to the non-materiality of the mind, the fact that the mind is not something material or physical. So it's not made of atoms or any kind of material particle, and it doesn't have any physical properties such as color, shape, or tangibility. So mind isn't something we can see with our eyes. It's not something we can feel with our fingers. And it's not something that can be seen under microscopes or with any other kind of instruments that scientists have created so far. Maybe they will one day. Who knows? They might be able to create an instrument that is able to observe the mind, but difficult if it's not physical, if it's not a material thing. So it can't be perceived by our senses. So the mind is not something we can perceive with our senses. The only part of our mind that can know the mind is the mental consciousness. I'll explain that later, the different aspects of the mind or different types of the mind and what kind of objects they can know, they can experience. So we'll get into that a little later. But it's not perceivable by our senses. So that itself is difficult. We're used to just dealing with things that we can see, that have physical properties that can be seen and maybe even dissected and examined under microscopes and so on. But the mind is not that kind of thing. So that's the meaning of clarity. And then the second term is awareness. So awareness is the function of the mind, what the mind does, its job. So the job of the mind is to be aware, to know. So other terms for awareness could be to know, to experience, to be aware of. And there's always an object. So that's what the mind is aware of. The mind is aware of its object. There always has to be an object of the mind. It's not possible for the mind to exist without knowing something, being aware of something. experiencing something. So there's always an object of the mind. But it doesn't always have to be fully conscious of its object. For example, in states of deep sleep or unconsciousness, coma, mind is still there. It's still operating. It's still experiencing something, even if it's just darkness or blankness. Something is being experienced by the mind. Just the way the mind works. It has to have something that is being experienced. And also, we have thoughts or feelings that maybe we can use the word subliminal. They're sort of below our conscious awareness. So, like during our day, during the day when we're awake and we're busy doing things, but we can have deeper experiences, little thoughts or feelings that flicker in and out, sometimes very fast. And we may not be fully aware, fully conscious of them, but they're still there. And those are part of our mind. So it's not, so the point is, when we say mind is aware or mind experiences or mind knows, it doesn't necessarily mean that always has to be on a conscious level. Okay, it could be on a deeper level and even unconscious level. So according to Buddhism, our mind is always on. It never has a break. 24 hours a day, every minute, every second, the mind is operating, functioning, doing something, experiencing something, whether we're aware of it or not. Okay? Whether we know what's going on in our mind or not. Something is going on. Something is going on. And also the last point there says, it doesn't have to understand its object. Okay, so I think when we talk about the mind being aware or knowing or experiencing, that doesn't imply the mind necessarily understands the object. I mean, we know that from our own experience. Sometimes we'll see something we've never seen before, and maybe we see shapes and colors, but we don't know what it is until somebody tells us. So it's not necessary to always understand the object. Same with hearing. We hear sounds, some sound we'd never heard before. What's that? But we do hear it. We do experience it, even if we don't understand it. So mind is just clarity. I sometimes describe it as non-physical energy, although the word energy is very vague. What is energy? I guess there's no real definition of energy. But just to say it's something, it's there, it exists, but it's not physical, not material. It's something non-physical, non-material. So that kind of describes its nature, what it is. And then awareness, the other part of the definition, is what it does, how it works, how it functions. It is aware, it knows, it experiences things. Okay, then the next slide has some other information about the mind according to Buddhism. The first is that mind is impermanent, constantly changing. We might have an idea of the mind being something like an organ that's sitting inside of us somewhere and then having these different experiences as if it's stable and fixed. But that is not an accurate image of the mind. It isn't a thing that's sitting there and it's always the same, stable and fixed. It's better to think of it as a stream or a river that's always changing. And in fact, in the traditional teachings, they often use the term mind stream or mental continuum to refer to the mind. It's a stream, a continuum always changing, in the sense that each moment or each fraction of a moment, like a really, really short period of time, in each moment there's a new experience arising, and that experience lasts only a moment and immediately ceases and gives rise to the next one, and that ceases and gives rise to the next one, and that ceases and gives rise to the next one. So it's like that. It's just this series or continuum of momentary experiences, momentary mental events. Each one just arises and then disappears, arises and disappears, arises and disappears. I sometimes think about bubbles, like if you open a bottle of Coca-Cola or something, something fizzy, some fizzy drink, and there's all these bubbles that come up and immediately pop. Bubbles are very impermanent, very transitory. They just last a moment and then they pop, they burst. So the mind is a bit like that. It's just each experience is like a bubble, just arises and it's gone. But it doesn't completely go, because it transforms into the next one, changes into the next one. The next one is different. So each moment of mind, each bubble of mind is different from the one before. So in fact, it's instead of using mind in singular, it's more accurate to use it in plural, minds. We have minds rather than a mind. Because if you say a mind, it sounds like one thing that's always the same, always there, always the same. But it's not like that. It's a continuum, a series of many different minds. But each instance, each momentary experience is called mind, a mind. Maybe better to say a mind. So, for example, in the text, they'll sometimes have an expression like a mind that realizes emptiness, or a mind that realizes impermanence. So it's a mind, a particular experience within the mind. So that's as much as I understand it. It's kind of mysterious in a way, difficult to get a hold of. But yeah, the best way is to just watch our mind, observe our mind. And we can see how it is changing. Yeah, so each moment of mind arises from the previous moment of mind and lasts only a moment and then ceases, giving rise to the next moment of mind. So that's a more accurate description of what the mind is, rather than a fixed thing inside of us like an organ. We probably think that way because of the tendency in the West to think of the brain as being either the mind itself or the thing that produces our experiences. So we know our brain is sitting there in our head, and it changes, yes, but it's kind of always there. So then we may think the mind, as explained by Buddhism, is similar to that. But it's not. It's a very different kind of phenomenon. And then, to blow your mind even more, the third bullet point says, this stream or continuum of momentary experiences has been existing from beginningless time. So that's one that really gets people. What? Again, we like beginnings. We like to be able to point, this is where it started. Like our life. Our life started at a certain point in our mother's womb on such and such date, or when we came out of the womb, when we were born. That's an important date, my birth date. That's the day I came into existence. So it's kind of comfortable to feel like we started at a certain point. But to think there was no beginning to the mind, it's always been there, it's always been existing. Very difficult to understand, to fathom. Just put it on the shelf. Just put it on the back burner. Don't worry about it. But yeah, even the Buddha, there's a whole series of sutras in the Pali tradition. I can show them, if I can point to them if you want. But the Buddha is saying this again and again and again. There is no beginning. There is no beginning. And the next one, it will never end. Also difficult. What? There's no end? Well, this is according to Mahayana Buddhism. In the Theravada tradition or the Pali tradition, not sure if everyone agrees on this, but there are some who say the mind does end when a person attains Buddhahood, becomes a Buddha, or they attain nirvana, become an arhat. While their body is still there, then their mind will continue to be there. But once their body dies, this is the term for this is parinirvana. So at that point, the mind goes out of existence. So there are some Buddhists who believe that. But according to Mahayana Buddhism, that is not the case. The mind doesn't stop existing just when the body does. It keeps going. And in fact, it will never go out of existence. And I think I remember reading or hearing something about how there is no antidote to the mind. There is nothing that can destroy the mind. Lots of things that can destroy our body, but nothing can counteract the mind and make the mind go out of existence. It's just not possible. It just keeps going one moment after another. Now, if that sounds scary to you, according to Mahayana Buddhism, all of us will at some point reach enlightenment. Our mind will become enlightened mind, awakened mind, Buddha mind. And then there's no more suffering, no more disturbing thoughts or emotions, only peace and bliss and everything positive, especially this wish to benefit sentient beings. So you're happy to keep going and work to help sentient beings be free of their suffering. So there's no sense of boredom or tiredness or misery or anything unpleasant, just joy from one moment to the next. Joy, 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 every moment. Great enjoyment. Yeah, so when you hear about the mind going on forever, it doesn't mean a suffering mind will exist forever. A painful, disturbed, confused, suffering mind will go on forever and ever and ever. No. I mean, we might suffer for quite a while before we become enlightened. But no, once we practice, once we learn the Dharma, we learn how to work with our mind and how to transform our mind, then the suffering definitely decreases and the joy increases. So we don't have to wait until we're Buddha and our mind is fully enlightened in order to have more joy. We can have more joy before then. So you don't have to worry if these things, these ideas are difficult to accept. Again, put them on the back burner. I'm just sharing with you how the mind is explained in Buddhism. Okay, the last point on that slide is each person has their own individual mind stream. There's no universal mind or cosmic consciousness that we are all part of. So apparently some non-Buddhist philosophies or spiritual traditions do have this idea of a cosmic consciousness. I think it's called Brahman, if I remember correctly, that's the term for it. So it's this kind of universal mind that's blissful and pure, and everybody's mind is actually part of that, but we don't know it. That's why we're confused. And so our job is to wake up and realize we are part of this universal mind, this cosmic consciousness or Brahman or whatever it's called, and then everything will be okay. So people, maybe because that idea comes from India and Buddhism also comes from India, some people think, oh, that's a Buddhist idea, but it's not. It's not a Buddhist idea. According to Buddhism, each person has their own individual mind, and that will be the case forever. So even when we become a Buddha, an enlightened being, it doesn't mean that all enlightened minds merge and become one big ocean of enlightened mind. We still retain our own individual mental continuum even after enlightenment. So you can think about that and disagree with it if you like, but anyway, that's what they say. And also, it's not possible for our minds to merge with other minds, even though people do sometimes describe experiences where they feel as if their mind and maybe their partner's mind, their lover's mind are one. It may feel like that. Our minds become one in this blissful union of love or whatever. I don't know. I don't think I've ever had that experience, but people do talk about that. And again, that's not really the case. It isn't possible, according to Buddhism, for two minds to merge and become one mind. It's probably more that those two people are having very similar experiences because of the circumstances and their karmic connection and whatever. So causes and conditions have come together for them to have similar experiences, and they may feel as if their minds have merged and become one, but that's not really the case. Because also you can see afterwards your minds go in different directions. That's as I understand it, according to Buddhism. So each one of us has our own mental continuum. One moment of mind giving rise to the next moment of mind and the next one and so on and so on. And the same with each other person. And they never kind of get mixed up and mingled and merged and anything like that. But of course we do affect each other. You know, the kind of experience one person has. One person is joyful, for example, in a room full of people who are miserable. So that joyful person, looking joyful, speaking in a joyful way, acting in a joyful way, that could affect other people so that they become more joyful. Also, one person who's miserable, miserable and depressed in a room full of people can affect other people, and they can feel miserable as well. I don't know if any of you, there was this film that somebody made, I don't know if you call it a documentary. No, it's more like a film, very short film, showing this train, I think it was a subway in Paris, a subway car full of people, and they're all looking miserable. They're all sitting there, nobody's talking to anybody, nobody's smiling, everyone is just looking completely miserable. Did anyone see that film? And the train stops at a station, and one man comes on, and he goes and sits down. And then he looks like he's kind of thinking about something. He's smiling and laughing. He starts laughing to himself about some funny thing that happened to him. And the other people are going like this, but then they start smiling too and laughing. And pretty soon the whole car full of people, they're all laughing. Nobody's talking to each other, but they're just laughing. I mean, it's obviously staged. I don't think, but it could happen. I mean, it can happen like that one person's joy can be so infectious that it makes other people joyful as well. So we can't influence each other. The state of mind that we have can influence other people, which is why it's so important to try to keep our mind positive as much as we can. Try to have joyfulness and kindness and friendliness and warmth and generosity. Then there's a greater chance that the people around us will start to show those qualities. But that doesn't mean that something from our mind transfers to other people's minds and makes them that way. As far as I understand, that is just not possible. If it was possible, then the Buddha would transfer all his good qualities and his realizations into everybody else's minds, and we'd all quickly become Buddhas. So, yeah, that's what Buddha wants. Okay, so that's a little bit about information about the mind. Okay, any questions so far before I go on? Because I'm going to start talking about different types of minds. If there's something about this material that's unclear you want to ask about.
In the example with the people who miss their flights, what there are the karmic results? Is it missing the flight? Is that the result of their karma? Or is it their unpleasant experience? Or is it their afflictions?
No, I was talking about the way they reacted, not so much the flight, but how they respond to this situation. So the person who gets angry and upset and maybe even speaks, goes up to the desk and berates the flight. I don't know, what are the people who are at the desk, I mean, that does sometimes happen, blaming them as if it's their fault. So if a person does get angry and then acts or speaks in an angry way, they're creating negative karma. And on the other hand, a person who's able to sit there calmly and not get angry, but practicing patience, and maybe even using that time to do something virtuous, reading a Dharma book or meditating or reciting prayers or mantras. So they're creating virtue. So I'm just saying that's an opportunity where we could create virtue or non-virtue depending on how we respond and how we use that situation. So that's what I was talking about.
Okay. So I was wondering, like, the results created or the causes created in the past to have those experiences. What did they do in the past that made them, did it cause them to miss the flight, or did it cause them to be upset or to yell at the people?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose having to not miss a flight, but a delayed flight would be the result of karma. Whether it's good karma, bad karma, I don't know. But yeah, maybe bad karma, because missing one flight may cause you to miss other flights and all kinds of other complications and problems. So that's one way that karma could ripen, and the kind of experiences we have, the kind of situations we find ourselves in, but also the way we respond. That too would be, I guess you could say that would be a result of karma, because one of the results of karma is having the tendency to do the same thing again and again. So the person who responds with anger, it's probably because they have that tendency. They got angry many, many, many times before whenever they had something inconvenient happening to them. So they set up this tendency to behave that way again. And the person like the Dalai Lama who sits there and meditates on the 8 verses of thought training, that's because he has that tendency since he was a child and many lives before. So the kind of tendencies we build up or accumulate, the habits that we have, will have an effect on how we respond when we do find ourselves in certain situations.
When we connect with awareness and meditation, is it different for each individual?
When we connect with awareness?
Or when we meditate on awareness of the nature of the mind, is it different for each person?
Well, it would be different for each person because each person has their own mind. So you may have a group of people sitting there all doing the same kind of meditation, but what's actually happening would be unique for each person. It's not that they're become one mind having the same experience. So yeah, each person would have their own individual experiences. But the nature of the mind for each person is the same. Every person's mind has the same qualities of clarity and awareness, the same basic stuff, you could call it. Okay, so all of us have clarity and awareness, but how the clarity and awareness unfold or manifest would be unique for each person. Like even a sound happens, we all hear the same sound, but the way we hear that sound would not be exactly the same for each person. We may have different feelings about it. It may trigger off different memories, different thoughts, conceptions. And even the way we hear it, some people's hearing is better than others, and so on. So yeah, so it's this, each person's mind, I'm just guessing, this is my understanding, each person's mind is basically the same stuff, clarity and awareness, but the way it arises, the way it manifests in each person would be different and unique. I think so. Maybe it's different for Buddhas, but for us, I think it would be unique.
So what might seems to be a bad karma might in fact prove to be beneficial to us and others? Does it depend on how we investigate after the experience?
Or even during the experience. Even during the experience of a bad experience is happening, if your mind is well trained, if you're familiar with knowing, like Lojong, thought transformation, or other Dharma practices, then quite quickly you can think, oh, here's a bad experience, but I can use this to learn, I can use this to practice, develop compassion, or do tonglen, or whatever. So you don't have to wait until a long time afterwards, but even quite within that experience itself, it's possible to transform it into something constructive.
In context to having awareness that we don't have to be, fully clearly see the object. Like yesterday, when Mashutan was mentioning in her teaching, she is intending to write a book, but then she has in her back mind the idea, okay, there are a lot of emails that she has to process as well. And so, but as if it would be like a big shadow over her head and hindering her from writing the books. So I just wonder, because I know that very well too, I think we all know that something is always, or there's often something in the back that hinders us to be maybe fully present when cooking or whatever doing. So I just wonder often how to work with that mind that has this kind of awareness.
How to work with
that mind, that is
something bothering you, and it's
that is so
interfering with your ability to be fully focused and joyful.
Basically, she was saying that in the context of laziness, she may turn to the emails that may be easier just to clean them up instead of working on the book. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a big part of our practice, is developing mindfulness and what's sometimes called introspective awareness or mental alertness, which is kind of just watching our mind and what's going on in our mind. And one of the main purposes of that is to look out for trouble, look out for states of mind that are disturbing. It could be angry, or it doesn't even have to be negative. It could be sadness. It could be worry, but there's something going on there, and it's affecting us and making it hard for us to do other things properly. So it's good to take some time, if you can, to look at that and ask yourself, what's going on there? Try to identify it. So that's another reason why it's good to learn about the mind. Not this weekend, but the next one I plan to talk about the mental factors, all these different factors in our mind that some of which are positive or virtuous, others are afflictive, and being able to notice, oh, that's this one is happening to me now. So being able to name it, identify it itself is very, very helpful. Oh, that's what's happening to me right now. And then look in your toolbox. We learn so many different tools that we can use to work with different emotions. There's specific tools for anger, and there's others for attachment, and there's others for jealousy. So you look in your toolbox, what tool can help me fix this one? There's some that are more general, like impermanence. Just remind yourself, this is impermanent. It's not going to last forever. I don't need to take it too seriously. It'll pass. So there's lots of different tools or methods that you can use for dealing with different disturbing or afflictive states of mind. So it's just a question of doing it. It does take some effort, and sometimes maybe you feel like can't be bothered and you just want to do something else instead, distract yourself. But if you do sit down and take a look at the mind and then work on it, apply remedies, apply antidotes to whatever it is that's disturbing you, then you'll probably find that frees up your energy. You're free of that disturbance, and then it's easier to cook or do your write your book or whatever it is you're trying to do. So I want to talk a little bit more, go on a bit further. Now we'll start looking at divisions of the mind, different types of mind that we have. That helps us also understand our mind better instead of thinking of it just as one big blob of experiences, but being able to pinpoint different kinds of experiences. So one way of dividing up the mind is into what are called the 6 consciousnesses. And the word consciousness, the term consciousness, is interchangeable with mind. There's actually many different terms in Tibetan and in Sanskrit and Pali for mind. And sometimes it's challenging trying to find different English words, because you don't want to translate the same Tibetan word with the same, or different Tibetan words with the same English word. It's nice to be able to have different words, but we don't necessarily have that many different words for mind in English. But I've heard some languages are even more difficult. Some European languages, it's even more challenging to come up with different terms. Anyway, so consciousness, that's just another term for mind. And so these 6 types of mind are also called main minds or primary minds, as opposed to mental factors, which we'll do later, so don't worry so much about now. But a main mind is more just a general experience of an object. When we experience an object, it's just the general experience. And then within that, there's different facets that experience more specific things. They sometimes compare it to someone like a prime minister or president who has the main job of being the head of the country, but then that person doesn't do all the work. They have different ministers, or what do they call it in this country? The cabinet members. I don't know. Anyway, there are terms for these different people. Each one has their own specific portfolio or job or education or health or transportation and so on. So the mental factors are a bit like that. They're like the cabinet members or the ministers that serve and assist and work together with the president or the prime minister. So a main mind is like the president or the prime minister, and then the mental factors are like the cabinet members. And they all kind of work together to run the show. So anytime we have an experience, an individual instance of awareness or mind, it's one of these 6. Always one of these 6. And some of these are called sense consciousness. Sense consciousness. There's 5 types of sense consciousness. These are related to our 5 senses. So this is something we have in the West as well. We talk about 5 senses. And so there's eye consciousness, or seeing. Simple terminology is seeing, but in Buddhist texts they call it eye consciousness or visual consciousness. So that's when we see objects. So when we have our eyes open and they're functioning. Some people's eyes don't function. They're blind, partially blind, visually impaired. So if our eyes are open and functioning, then we see objects. So that experience of seeing objects, seeing visual objects, which are basically shapes and colors. What our eye consciousness sees are just shapes and colors. And then later our mental consciousness formulates the shapes and colors into objects. That's a chair, that's a human being, that's a cat, that's a table, and so on and so forth. But our eyes don't actually see tables and chairs and peoples. They just see shapes and colors. Ear consciousness is hearing. So what we hear, what that experiences are sounds. And Buddhism makes a division of sounds into those that are conjoined with consciousness and those that are not conjoined with consciousness. So if a human being or an animal or a bird or whatever is making noise, making sound, that's sound conjoined with consciousness. It's made by a being who has a mind, who has a consciousness. And then there's other sounds that are not conjoined with consciousness, like the sound of the wind, or the sound of waves on the shore, or the sound of a machine, a car engine. So those are sounds that are not conjoined with consciousness. I don't know why they make that division, but anyway, that's how they divide. So there's all different kinds of noise or sounds that we experience with our ear consciousness. So whenever we have that kind of experience of hearing, then that's our ear consciousness operating. Nose consciousness is aware of odors, different kinds of smells. Tongue consciousness is aware of tastes, like sweet, salty, bitter, chili, I don't know what you call that, hot, spicy. Okay, different kinds of tastes. And then our body consciousness is aware of tactile sensations. So that can include many different things. When our body contacts something else, like our fingers are touching something, then it may feel cool or hot, soft or hard, sharp or rough or whatever. So those are tactile experiences, but also within our body, we have many different sensations like tingling or pain or pleasant or whatever. So when we have those kinds of bodily sensations, then that's our body consciousness operating. So those are the five sense consciousnesses. The sixth consciousness is called the mental consciousness. So that includes all of our thoughts and our memories and emotions. And when we sleep at night, when we go to sleep, our five sense consciousnesses stop operating. They become dormant or non-functional for that period of time. And it's only our mental consciousness that's operating, having dreams. Sometimes there's dreamless sleep, but according to Buddhism, even in dreamless sleep, there's still mind. Mind is still there, experiencing something, maybe just darkness. I don't know. I can never remember what goes on in my mind at night. A lot goes on, but I usually forget it as soon as I wake up. But some people have this ability to remember dreams, and also some people have the ability to have lucid dreams. They can have awareness while they're asleep and dreaming and know that they are dreaming. And they can even, I don't know if they can even manipulate their dreams or play around with their dreams. Maybe some people can do that, but that's all mental consciousness. That's just mental consciousness, not any of the five sense consciousnesses. So mental consciousness is quite vast, and that's the main thing we work on in our practice of Dharma. When we practice meditation, it's mainly using the mental consciousness and training the mental consciousness to have more positive, virtuous thoughts and experiences, and decrease all the afflictive emotions. The troublemakers, they are in the mental consciousness. They are part of the mental consciousness. So we have to learn how to manage those, work with those, overcome those. Mind is impermanent. And not only does that mean it's something changing moment by moment, impermanent phenomena are also dependent on causes and conditions. Every impermanent phenomena arises from causes and conditions. So each moment of mind, each experience that we have arises from causes and conditions. And texts mention three main conditions that give rise to a mind and experience. So in the case of sense consciousnesses, seeing or hearing or whatever, one of the conditions is an object. There's an object. And it would be mainly external objects, things that we see. So an example here is the color red. So again, what we see are colors and shapes: green, red, blue, square, round, triangular, big, small, different colors and shapes. That's what we see. And with hearing, what we hear is sounds. So anyway, there's always an object that is seen or heard or smelled or tasted. So that's one of the factors. In order to have an experience, there has to be an object that is experienced. And the second one is the sense power. So there's a difference in Buddhism between a sense power and a sense organ. So our eye, for example, the eye that we can see, the eyeball and all the different parts of the eye and so on, that's the organ. And the power, it's actually the same word in Tibetan. It's very confusing, but there is a difference. The sense power is said to be subtle matter, some kind of subtle form inside the organ. So somewhere inside of our eye, there's this very subtle material. And that's the actual sense power that enables seeing to happen, that enables that experience of seeing to take place. And if there's something wrong with that, something not functioning with that, then we won't be able to see, or we might see in a mistaken way, a distorted way. So there are people who have impaired senses, unable to see or unable to hear. It's said that with COVID, people who got COVID would lose their sense of taste and smell. Is that right? Yeah, so those senses can be impaired as well. And I guess body senses, at least in parts of the body, might be impaired. Sense of numbness, unable to feel sensations in certain parts of the body. So that indicates an impairment in that sense power, so that one is not able to have that kind of sense consciousness. The third condition is the previous moment of mind. So, as I mentioned before, each moment of mind arises and ceases, but turns into the next moment of mind. Okay, so a previous moment of mind ceased and then transformed into the next moment of mind, which has that present experience of whatever it is, seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting. So it said that those are the main conditions that need to happen, that need to be there, that need to come together in order for a sense consciousness to occur. And this is happening just constantly, every minute, every second. We are having these experiences, meaning that those conditions are coming together and causing the next. But it is helpful to understand that there are factors, there are causes and conditions for the experiences that we have. They don't just happen in a random way, without any reason, without any causes and conditions. There's reasons, causes and conditions.